夢はなくなったらね、おそらく生きる屍だな。
Welcome back to Bruno Tuner, and today we are going to be starting our first episode on automotive history. Today's topic will be the history of Honda and how it got its start in America. The plan is to break this up into a few different sections so we can easily follow along. So we're just going to get right into it, and we'll start off with what brought them to America first. So Honda, as we know it today, is one of the largest automobile manufacturers in the world. Of course, they do make several other products rather than just automobiles. In the last year, they sold about 20 million combined motorcycles and automobiles, and America is about 32% of those sales. We have now established ourselves on solid ground domestically. Eventually, we'll have to aim to be number one worldwide. So our story starts out in about the mid-50s in Japan. At this time, Honda had really established themselves as a top motorcycle manufacturer in Japan, with about 7 years passed since they started producing motorcycles. They started exporting motorcycles after this, and what they wanted to do was export to overseas instead of just Southeast Asia. That was their first expansion, and of course it only made sense to go to Europe and then to America from there. So the way this got its start was a man named Kawashima. He was the manager of sales in Honda's headquarters at this time. And in 1956, he went down to Europe and Southeast Asia to begin conducting surveys to see how their motorcycles were received down there. And they did very well. So when he came back to report this, the next step was, hey, go take this to America now. He conducted a similar survey in the US, and what he saw is that Americans really liked automobiles over motorcycles, and I think that still rings true today. If you go to other countries in Southeast Asia or in Europe, you're going to see a lot more motorcycles than you would here in the US. We are still very much land of the big car, big truck, V8, gas guzzler. That has a lot to do with how America is. You know, we have a lot of very rural areas, and commuting is a huge part of our life, where in other places they might have public transport, smaller roadways, shorter commutes where a motorcycle comes in very handy. Upon his return to the US, Kawashima gave a proposal to Fujisawa. He said, I believe it would be easier to start in Asia and then move to America. And Fujisawa had considered this for a moment, and then he said, actually on second thought, let's do America now. So setting up a company in another market is definitely no easy task, and it was suggested by a lot of the board at Honda that they go in with a trading company to help them set up a sales network. Fujisawa, though, had already decided that he wanted to create a sales network of his own, and so we have the American Honda Motor Company. He knew what could happen if a third party got involved and didn't want another company's interest holding Honda back if they wanted to move forward with projects. And furthermore, Honda believed in their products, so they wanted to sell a product that was durable and good, and that implied that they had a responsibility to the customer once it left their lot. And of course, who better to run the task than Kawashima? So Fujisawa directed him to move to the US at the young age of 39 to be the lead on this project, so he became the director of sales in America. So at this point in his life, he had already had experience building Honda's motorcycle sales network in Japan. Kawashima chose his first location in Los Angeles, California to start his network. And they did this because climate was a determining factor with this. If they're going to sell motorcycles, well, they need to have good weather. So Los Angeles, sunny California, what better place? To add on to that, Los Angeles was a very large hub of Japanese Americans. So to get this started up, they visited the Ministry of Finance in Japan and requested a loan of about $1 million, and they were swiftly denied. Japan wanted nothing to do with this, and they didn't think it was a good idea. They didn't think it was a good idea because they didn't see motorcycles succeeding in the US. And so Kawashima took several visits back to the Ministry of Finance over time, and eventually they gave him $250,000 in 1959 as a grant to start this business. So after Kawashima relocated to LA in June of 1959, the first task he had to do was find some property for them to build an office in. And he felt that they needed to put down roots to establish themselves. And he said, instead of renting, why not just buy the property? He said this property probably cost him about $100,000 back then, and even the bank thought that was pretty gutsy at the time. What they did was relocate to an old photo studio in LA. And you got to remember that at this time, this was shortly after the war had ended, World War II. And a lot of Americans had a bad reaction to Honda, thinking that, there's no way that they just lost a war and now they're going to come over here and hope to sell a product. And of course, looking towards the future, we can see just how wrong they would be on that sentiment. So at this time, the American motorcycle market was only about a tenth of sales of what they were doing in Japan, about 50 to 60,000 units annually. And of course, the reason for that is, like I said earlier, Americans, we just love cars. It's a huge part of our transportation, and motorcycles really aren't seen as a primary form of transportation for most of us. It's also worth noting that at the time, motorcycles had a bad stigma because of groups like Hells Angels at the time, who had a foundation in California and were known for being reckless, violent criminals. And of course, the movies that also depicted such things really didn't shine a good light on motorcycle as a culture. And so that's kind of where Honda decided to take a stand and put out the image that motorcycles can be a family-friendly, fun thing to do. So Honda had a rough start in the 1960s when they first started selling motorcycles. The first couple of years, they were selling a few hundred products and they were off to a good start. But then came the complaints of reliability, and Japan had to dispatch mechanics to Honda in America almost immediately. There were reports of upwards of 150 engines that it seized, and Honda went to work to try to deal with this problem. The big issue that Kawashima saw is that he knew that a lot more bikes were coming over from Japan and they were potentially going to have the same problems. So he went to work to try to come up with a solution. What he decided to do was take everything that was defective, including the ones that were coming over from Japan, and send them back. He said, we're not going to sell a product that's not roadworthy here. And the reason why is because he felt if they continued to sell a product and try to fix them there on the shores of the US, they would have a bad reputation as an unreliable vehicle, and that's the last thing that Honda wanted. So being that Honda lost its main line of products, getting sent back to Japan for repair and further evaluation, they moved on to focus on their other main product, which was the Super Cub 50. And that is actually still sold today as the Super Cub 125. What made this different is that it was small and easy to ride, had about twice the horsepower of its competitors, and it appealed to men and women, with its step-through design that allowed women of the time to wear dresses while they rode this motorcycle. It was unlike anything that the American market had seen before, and it took off. In 1961, they saw their monthly sales go upwards of 1,000 units, and Kawashima didn't see it growing too much more than this unless they ran a successful ad campaign to popularize the Super Cub. What Kawashima did to remedy this is he traveled around and gave presentations and even worked with sporting goods stores to have the Super Cub sold in stores. Furthermore, he reached out to bigger magazines and publications like Life magazine to run several page ads. And while this was expensive, it did result in increased sales for Honda. In fact, the ads worked so well that due to the increase of customers that Honda saw, they had to start selling parts and have a service system here in the US as well. And one of Kawashima's main focuses was not to just sell parts to people, but to focus on customers after the product was sold and ensure that they could keep a good reputation as a road-going, worthy vehicle at the time. Alright guys, thanks so much for checking this video out this week. If you like this kind of content, please let us know. I really enjoy doing these kind of like history topics. I have fun researching this kind of stuff. But next week we're going to pick back up and finish this story about Honda, how they came to America, and get into like the first cars they started building here. But that'll do it for now, so thanks for checking this out. We'll see ya.
Eh,
界一のホンダになったわけですから。
まあそうですね。来年また敗れるかもしれんからね。いやそれなんですよ。世界中のいわゆるその自動車屋が注目してうちを叩こうとしてるんじゃないですか、レースで。結構な話ですね。そういうことがね、私は自動車を進歩させ、より安全な車をお客さんに提供する基本だと思うんです。それを逃げているんだったら私は自動車屋やめるな。他の人はどうだか知りません。私はやめます。
逃げてはいかんと。
逃げちゃいかんです。どんな苦しくても逃げてはならん。お客さんにはとにかく高いお金を出して買っていただいて、それで怪我させたなんていうのはこれは一番不道徳ですよ、僕に言わせる。責任は重いですからね。だから責任は重いから我々がその一番危険な責任を負っていろいろなものを解決することをしなきゃならないんですね。そういう意味によってレーサーをそういうような見方をしていただけると非常にありがたいんです。